Welcome to Garden Theory. My name's Zach, and today we're going to be talking about some of the questions that y'all have left in the comments in some of my past videos. And so I thought for today's video we would go over those and hopefully answer some of your common questions and to be able to hopefully explain a little bit more about landscape design and how you can improve the landscaping in your home. So let's dive into it. So for our first question, this is a question I got on my last video. It's about how can you add seasonal interest throughout the entire year in your landscape design. And I think this is a great question. This is definitely something you want to consider when you're in the design phase of your landscaping. You want something that's going to look good for all 4 seasons of the year. Of course, winter can be sometimes a little tricky to find things that are interesting to add beauty in that time of year, but there's quite a few options that you can do, and we're going to dive into that. So while we're in the design phase of our landscaping, when we're picking out the different shrubs and flowers that we want to keep in mind the bloom time of each one. And a good resource that you can use is gardenia.net. It's a really good resource. It'll help to show you different plants and what they look like at different times of the year. It's a website that I like to use a lot when I'm designing landscape design projects. When we're designing our landscapes, you want to try to find things that are going to flower in the spring, in the summer, and the fall. And then for winter interests, you can get a variety of different things. A couple of things that come to mind for winter interest. Hellebores or Leyton roses bloom late winter to early spring. Red twig dogwoods with their bright red twigs in the winter stand out against the snow. You can leave hydrangea flowers on over the winter, and they create a beautiful interest in the winter months. So there's a lot of different ways that you can bring home that winter interest. And a good thing to have in your landscape is to have a variety of different evergreen plants. That way you have a few things that are obviously your deciduous shrubs are going to be mostly kind of bare in the winter, but then you can have some evergreen junipers and hollies that help to provide some extra texture in the winter months that you can pair with deciduous highlights like red twig dogwoods and hydrangeas like I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of the best thing you can do. There's usually not a whole lot of things that bloom in the winter. Leyton roses, and I would say as well as witch hazels are probably your best ones for that late winter, early spring blooming. But we want an attractive mix of evergreens, deciduous, perennial plants. You want to have a broad range of textures and different blooming periods. And so the more variety you have in your landscape design, the overall feel and look of your landscape is going to be a lot better throughout the whole year. So I recommend, depending on the size of your landscape, having at least 20 to 50 different varieties of plants. Because that way, even if one plant that you plant doesn't do very well, you still have a lot of other variety around you. And that way you can kind of fill in stuff that works better as you go on throughout your journey with your landscape design project. So that's something that I would recommend. Now the next question, I've gotten this a couple times from a few people, but it's how do I design things so they don't just look random or messy or chaotic? How do I make a design that looks complete? And that's kind of a good question. We did a video towards the beginning of our channel called, I think it's called The 7 Steps of Landscape Design. I'll have it linked above my head. You can go watch that after I explain this to you. I'm going to grab a landscape design and we're going to walk through some of the steps that I talk about in that video. I'll kind of just summarize it and show you how you can learn how to place things in a landscape design. If you're starting fresh with a blank slate, or maybe you moved in somewhere and it's got a few plants but you want to reamp it, this is going to help you in your design journey figure out how do I place things where they're going to look good, it's not going to stand out, it's going to help make a complete landscape design that flows well and has a good sense of cohesion at the same time without looking too chaotic or messy. So let's go grab a landscape design and we're going to go look through it and showcase you some of those steps. Here's a landscape design. I've shown this before in a previous video. This is a landscape design that I did for my Intro to Landscape Design class at BYU, Idaho. And so I'm using this as an example for this question that we've had. I did a video talking about how to do landscape design, and essentially there's just a few simple steps that you need to follow. The first thing that you need to do is have a needs analysis and a site survey. And so with those two things, essentially your needs are, what do you want in your landscape? Do you want trampoline? Do you want lawn space? Do you want a pool? Like all the different things that you would want in your outdoor space, including patio, outdoor kitchen. Do you want a private reading area? All the different things that you would want for your space. And you need to get that list together of your essential things that you want. And then a site survey is essentially just getting a base map. And sometimes you can get a base map for your home that's to scale. You can also roughly draw one off from Google Earth is a good resource if you can measure things off of that. And using scale rulers, you can create a base map of your own. Essentially, you want to get a decent base map of your house. And you can do that by taking rough measurements if you don't have any of those resources. So by measuring all your exterior walls and then the distances to your property line, that can at least help you get a rough idea of your space. That way you know how to scale things in it. Because you don't want to have your scale not there, because then you don't know exactly how much space you have. You can kind of guesstimate. But this helps you to know precisely how much space you have to work with. And so once we have all of that in place, even before we start designing, that's going to help lay the foundation to create a good design. And so there's several different methods that we can use. So the first step in a landscape design is by creating what's called a functional diagram. Fortunately, I actually did keep some of the functional diagrams I made for this piece. And so I did this all on trace paper. And so this is what I recommend you get. So once you have, so if you just forget all this colored stuff I have on here. So this is the house right here. So imagine you have the base map, which is just your house and your property line. You get the trace paper and you put it on top of it. And that's a great way to plan out your landscape design. So this is my functional diagram for this piece. So this is my blueprint to say. So right here, you know, and this is not to scale at this stage. This is rough drawings. So the big thing that we're trying to plan out in this stage is planning out rough areas of where we want things, as well as the movement within your space. So we have the driveway here. So we know there's going to be movement from you parking your car in the driveway to the house, as well as to the street as well. So that's the movement out of the back door. For this particular property, they wanted a pathway on the side, so we know there's movement on the side. And that way we just know, okay, this is most likely where we're going to want our paths. And so we map out our movements. We roughly put out like, hey, we want a patio in the back. We want lawn off to the side. We want some screening along the road here. So this is the street on this side. So we want a section of landscaping to make the backyard more private. We also want screening along the back with some evergreens to block out our neighbor, especially with the patio. And this, we want a private reading area on the side, so we also want some screening to help privatize that. And so this just helps to get your rough ideas on paper. And so once we have that, we start going in and we start designing based off of where we roughly place things. And so once you have your shapes for your lawn and your patios and your hardscapes more in depth, that's where you start planning out your landscaping. And I think this is the main root of the question. And so for a landscape like this, it kind of depends on what kind of style you're going for. Some people like it more symmetrical, some people like it more naturalistic. This style kind of does a blend of both of those, a formal and informal style. And the way I did this is by having our hardscapes be more rigid with these 90-degree angles, as well as having these lines of trees. And that helps to create some rigid structure in the space. But then we have some free-flowing space over here. So that's a way you can kind of play with that. And so once you have your shapes for your lawn and your patios and your hardscapes more in depth, that's where you start planning out your landscaping. And I think this is the main root of the question. And so for a landscape like this, it kind of depends on what kind of style you're going for. Some people like it more symmetrical, some people like it more naturalistic. This style kind of does a blend of both of those, a formal and informal style. And the way I did this is by having our hardscapes be more rigid with these 90-degree angles, as well as having these lines of trees. And that helps to create some rigid structure in the space. But then we have some free-flowing space over here. So that's a way you can kind of play with that. We can talk about, we'll start down here in this corner. We'll start with trees, we'll work our way to shrubs, and then we'll work our way to perennials and annuals. And that's kind of the way you kind of want to do it when you're doing your tree, or when you're doing your plant selection. So the first step is trees, because those are going to be the biggest, they take up the most space, so you kind of want to know where those are going first. And so for your house, this is my personal recommendation, but typically you want your larger trees to be offset of your corners, because that's going to frame either side of the house. A lot of times you see people put a lot of big trees right in the front, which it does help to make your house feel more private and kind of secure, but that also kind of ruins your street side view, especially if you're going to sell your house in the future. It's nice to have those trees on each side because they kind of frame your house and kind of tuck it into the landscape so it doesn't feel as disconnected. And if you have trees there, then you don't really have that street side view of your house. But again, that kind of goes to personal taste. But that's what I did on this landscape design. So we put the redbud on this corner, and we have the southern magnolia on the other corner. And again, we'll talk about this in the next, or in the previous question, talking about seasonal interest. Redbud blooms in the spring, magnolia blooms early summer. And so that way we have two different interest points at different times on either side of our main focal point from the street. And so that's something you want to consider when you're designing your landscapes. Is if I only did all red buds, then it would only look good in the spring, and then the rest of the year it would look normal. So that's just something that you can do. And so then the rest of our trees, so on this side they wanted some fruit trees. So these 4 trees are actually fruit trees, apples and pears and peaches. And so this is kind of a mini orchard of sorts. And so we just did these in a straight line because that's kind of all the space that we had for it. So delegated this space for fruit trees. And then for this piece, again, for similar reasons, we have the tree offset, kind of 45-degree angle from the house. This is just a maple tree, just something to have as a corner piece for that deck. And then along here on the back side of this lawn, we have a row of spruce trees. So that's just to create that evergreen backing for that lawn. So that's why we placed them like that. And then the other trees in here, we have another maple. And the reason we put it there is because we have this curvilinear shape. And so it kind of just helps to fill in that natural space that we've created with. And then on this side of the house we have a flowering dogwood, which that will help to complement that red bud on the other side of our property. So when someone's driving along, they're going to see that pretty red bud, the big magnolia tree, and then they'll see the flowering dogwood as they pass. So it all helps create that really pretty street side view. And another kind of tip I would say with a lot of this is we want to layer our stuff like a pyramid. And so on either side of this, right, we have lawn. So lawn is the flat part. And then we go up to some shrubs, and then we go up to the tree. So, right, it's lawn, then shrubs, then tree. So we create that vertical view into the space. If we did lawn, tree, shrub, then that vertical space would be more janky. And so it helps create a better sense of flow out to the height of the tree. So that's another thing I would recommend with these shrubs and trees. That's kind of how I like to place them. So when you're looking at it, you see the lawn first, then the layer of shrubs, and then the layer of tree behind it. If that helps to make sense. I know sometimes it's a little hard to visualize it on paper, but that's something I try to do. And so now that we have our trees in, we can start working with our shrubs. And we kind of just fill in along the line with these trees. We kind of created this natural curvilinear line that goes around our lawn here. And so we just kind of fill it in. So on this corner between this pine tree and the redbud, we have some butterfly bush. Then we have some ground cover perennial plants. Then right here, this is a little bench, and we have some blackberry bushes behind it. Or you could also do raspberries, but it was just supposed to be a forageable item for your kids to eat off of. You know, they're playing in the lawn, then they can come over here and eat some berries. That was kind of the idea behind it. So you have a berry patch between the two trees, which again helps to connect that screening from the neighbors on this side. And again, we just have that, our shrubs go from tree to tree, tree to tree, just fill in all those gaps. And that way we have a cohesive, almost like a green fence, if you will. And then with our perennials, we do that, again with those layers, we do that in front of the trees and bushes. It's probably a little hard to see on camera, but that's what this pattern is with the green and red and blue dots. That's the perennial flowers. I don't have any of these named on here. They're just supposed to be miscellaneous flowers, but that's what I have. And that just helps to create that layered structure when you're looking at it from the lawn or really any point of the space. And so hopefully this helps a little bit. The best thing you can do is to have a good base mat, and that way you can use some trace paper and start just writing your ideas on here. Once you know where your stuff's going to go, things kind of just fit together naturally as you go through the process. And so once you have a decent idea, that's when you can start playing with shapes. So you can kind of see here, you know, I just knew I wanted lawn on this side. But then I started playing with different shapes. Do I want the lawn to be, you know, rectangular like my patio? But I decided to do a curvilinear design. And a lot of times you want to stick with larger arcs, like how I did here. And that just helps with your irrigation, because irrigation is really meant to be in a grid. So you want to keep that in mind with the shapes of your lawn spaces. So even one like this would be a little tricky to plan out your irrigation on. You would have maybe a few dry spots. So it's good to have things in mind when you're doing that, how it's going to be maintained long term. And it's good to repeat certain elements. So we have a little arbor over the garage, and we match that over our reading area to the side. So we just want to you know, it's okay to repeat a few elements in your landscape design. That helps to make it feel a little bit more put together. Doesn't feel as chaotic when you do that. And then once you know where you want your trees and shrubs, that's when you start going into plant selection, which can be a whole other topic to go into. But that's just how I would do landscape design. I recommend watching the full video that I did. Help to break it down a little further for you. This is just kind of an overview. So if you like where this conversation is going, I recommend to go watch that video. And again, I had it linked at the beginning of this conversation. The third question that we're going to talk about is how do I create a sense of privacy even when I have like 2-story windows from my neighbors' yards? So creating screening, as we call it in landscape design, is something very important that we want to figure out during our design phase. This is going to vary a lot depending on the yard space that you have to work with. But for 2nd-story windows, which is what this person was asking about, you're going to want either most likely a tree. Yeah, you're going to most likely have a tree to use to screen that space, just so you have the height to cover what you want to block. And again, this is going to depend if you have any power lines in the way or any kind of restrictions in your space. It may depend on what you can use. But a really good one that you can use that's tall and skinny are some cypress trees. There's lots of different varieties, but those can work pretty well in that more tight and narrow space. If you have a decent amount of space, I would recommend some larger shade trees, anything from maples to oaks. Anything that's going to be larger than 25 feet tall will be enough to cover that screen for you, so you don't have that view in your yard. The only other way you can create that is by using fences. You can't quite make a fence tall enough to block any second story windows, but you can use fences to create screening areas. Any arbors with vines is another way you can do that, as well as using a variety of different shrubs. Usually evergreen shrubs work the best on a ground level screening since they're going to be green and full all year. That way in the winter, your screen doesn't go away when the leaves drop. And so that's what I would recommend for screening. But again, a lot of that's just going to depend on your site and what you have available to use. So another question I've received is, how do I design if I have a really small front yard but I want to make it attractive? And that can be a little tight when you have a small space to work with. So knowing the size of full-grown plants is going to be really important. So we don't want to plant stuff that's going to grow too big and become a problem for you. And so we're going to actually go on paper and we're going to draw this out for you, how I would design something if you live in perhaps like a trailer home or something that's similar size with a small front yard from the road. And so we're going to grab a pen and paper and we're going to draw that out for you. And this is going to be very rough drawing. I'm just doing this with a pen, so hopefully we don't mess up too bad. So this is our house, and let's say this is the road. Let's say you have a very narrow space, so we're going to say this is roughly 10 feet across from here to here. So how do you design a landscape with such a narrow space like this? So let's just walk through the steps of how we would do this. So the first thing, we know we can't put anything too large in here, but we may be able to get away with putting some shrubs on this side. I think this space, which is probably only a couple feet wide, couldn't really do any shrubs unless they were really small, but it'd be easier to do shrubs on this side where they have a little bit more space. So we only have 3 feet of space on either side of that sidewalk. And then a bigger section over here, which that would be a total of 7 feet right here. Probably mark out our windows as well. So let's say we have a window on either side right there. So that's going to mark out our windows just like that. So we have a window on either side, and this is our door. This would be a very small house if this is the scale, but well, that's what we're going to do. So we don't want anything to block the view out of our window. So we're going to do a small shrub. I'd probably do another plant right there. And honestly, I don't think it would look too bad to have a mass on the front there. You know what? I've had some ideas. I'd probably do, we're going to assume that there's no irrigation. Let's do that limit to this. Let's say we have no irrigation. So we can only really hand water stuff. So whatever we plant, we kind of want to survive. So let's say instead of shrubs, we're going to say that that is little blue stem, a native grass that can take that spot and doesn't get too tall, like probably 3 to 4 feet tall. Let's say in front of it, perennial salvia. I think that would pair nicely with that. On this side, I'm almost decided to make this all one thing instead of 3. And we're going to make that Black-Eyed Susan, which does pretty well as a drought-tolerant plant. So yeah, we have some grasses, Black-Eyed Susan. We'll do a small row of salvias right there. Or we could even do it like that. It might make more sense to give it that whole space and make this one separate thing. And then I would probably make this some kind of ground cover. Maybe a sedum. Yeah, maybe some kind of hardy sedum. That's a ground cover. And you may have kids running across it, so I don't know. Maybe want to find something that's a bit more steppable. But I think that's how I would do that. And so let's draw what this would look like if you were looking at it head on. So I'm going to flip this over. Well, that'd be pretty much how it would look. And I think that's really about the best you can do with a narrow space. That's only, again, that's only 10 feet. You're not really talking about a whole lot. But I think that'd be the best way to showcase your house. Just by keeping things in simple, organized groups, I think would be the best way to do it. But that's what I would personally do. If you have such a small space, I don't think it's worth having any kind of lawn. But again, it could depend. But if you're working with a really small space, I don't think there's really much point to a lawn, since a lawn's really more for recreational area. And a lawn's going to be a lot more high maintenance. With every plant I have in here, the only maintenance you would have to do would be cleaning stuff up at the end of the season or early spring. Cutting back or burning these grasses, cleaning up all the dead flower stems from both the Black-Eyed Susan and Salvia. That would really be the only maintenance that you would have to do, besides weeding, of course. And I would recommend mulching all of this with hardwood mulch. But yeah, that's how I would design a small space personally, if you didn't have much room. That way you have really good seasonal interest, mostly summer to fall. Salvias will start blooming pretty quickly, but not in the spring. Be more of an early summer, but it would last throughout the whole season. Black-Eyed Susan's kind of the same. It would start probably early to late summer, all the way through the fall. But those Black-Eyed Susans with that really pretty yellow glow they have in the fall would be a really nice accent piece, as well as your grasses that you could keep all winter. And those little blue stems really add a nice bit of blue color in the fall throughout the winter. So I think overall that'd be really pretty. And that's kind of what I would do if you have a small space. Alright, well I hope you liked this style of video. I'm trying this out for the first time to see if you guys like this type of video where I respond to some of the comments and questions that I've received on the channel so far. And if you have any questions I didn't cover in this video, please comment them down below and I'll be sure to answer them in the comments. And if I think they're a good enough topic to cover in a video, I can do another video like this if you like this type of video. But let me know whether or not you like this and if you want to see more of this in the future. And I hope y'all all have a great rest of your summer as we go throughout this season. I've been really enjoying the channel with y'all, and thank you for supporting and watching the video, and I hope y'all all have a great rest of your day, and thank you for watching Garden Theory.